The morning he lost everything. It started so quietly, it almost felt rude. No shouting, no smashed glass, no dramatic confession echoing through a marble foyer. Just a phone vibrating against walnut wood. A low, annoying rattle on the kitchen island at 6:12 a.m. While the coffee machine hissed, while the sky over Bellevue was still gray-blue, while the man who had spent 3 years dismantling my life stood barefoot in imported Italian tile and smiled at a screen that had not caught up with reality yet. His name was Grant Holloway, 46, partner at a private equity firm, perfect hair even before sunrise. The kind of man who ironed his certainty into every sentence. If charm could be tailored, he wore it in custom navy. He looked at his phone, read whatever message had come in, and smiled the way rich men smile when they think the world has obeyed them again. Then he looked up at me. "Wire should clear by 9, he said, reaching for his espresso like we were discussing weather. "By lunch, the Lakeview parcel is locked. I told you, timing matters." That was Grant. Even breakfast sounded like a takeover. I stood at the opposite side of the island in one of my old cashmere wraps, both hands around a ceramic mug I wasn't drinking from. The kitchen was all glass and stone and controlled light, the sort of room that made imperfections feel trespassed. Behind him, the eastern windows gave a thin view of wet cedar trees and neighboring rooftops just beginning to take shape in dawn. He thought the wire transfer would save him. That was the first thing. The second thing was worse. He thought the house was still protected because it had been put into a trust 18 months earlier, a shell wrapped around another shell, after he told our attorney, our lender, and eventually the court that every asset had been prudently restructured. What he did not know, what he could not know yet, was that at 5:41 a.m., a judge in King County had signed the emergency order freezing the trust distributions, the brokerage sweep, the LLC operating accounts, and the pending purchase tied to funds under dispute. At 6:03, the title company had received it. At 6:07, his bank's internal fraud division had flagged 3 transfers. At 6:09, his partner at the firm had left him a voicemail he hadn't listened to yet. And at 6:12, his phone began to shake on the counter like a tiny animal trapped under glass. He smiled because he thought the day belonged to him. That was the last easy thing he would do. I had married Grant 13 years earlier in Newport, Rhode Island, back when his confidence still looked like ambition and my silence still looked like patience. We met in Boston when I was working in compliance for a regional bank, and he was still climbing, fast, polished, magnetic in the way dangerous men often are before they have enough power to stop pretending. He made every room feel brighter when he entered it. He made every person in it feel chosen, and when that kind of man chooses you, everyone tells you how lucky you are until one day you wake up and realize luck has nothing to do with cages. By the time we moved to Washington, we had a daughter, Avery, and a life designed to photograph well. The house in Bellevue Heights, the Tahoe in the garage, the charity dinners, the Christmas cards with coordinated sweaters and mountain backdrops. Grant was excellent at appearances because appearances were the only promises he ever intended to keep. The lies started small enough to wear shoes indoors, late dinners that became overnight strategy sessions, missing statements he blamed on paperless billing, accounts moved for tax efficiency, long stretches where he would lean on the kitchen counter exactly where he was standing now and explain my own concerns back to me in a tone so measured it made me sound unstable for having them. "You worry because you don't operate at this level," he told me once, smiling into a glass of red wine. It's not dishonesty, Mara. It's complexity. Complexity. That was his favorite word when theft needed a tuxedo. The first time I understood what he was really doing, Avery was 11 and asleep upstairs with a chemistry poster half finished on her desk. I was looking for the annual property tax file and found a FedEx envelope in Grant's office instead. Inside were draft transfer documents, unsigned but prepared, shifting ownership interests in 2 rental properties in Tacoma and 1 commercial unit in Redmond into an LLC I had never heard of, Hollow Oak Ventures. The manager listed wasn't Grant. It was his brother, Nolan, a man with 3 failed businesses and a talent for vanishing when creditors called. I confronted him that night in the den. He didn't even blink. "It's temporary," he said. "You moved marital assets into your brother's company." I protected them. From who? He took a slow sip of whiskey and looked at me over the rim of the glass like I had interrupted a meeting. From chaos, from taxes, from exposure, from emotionally driven decisions. Emotionally driven, meaning mine. That was the night I stopped arguing to be heard and started listening to survive. People imagine betrayal as a single event. A lipstick stain, a text message, a hotel receipt. It isn't. Not when the person doing it is smart. Then betrayal becomes architecture. Quiet, structural, designed years in advance. It lives in revised beneficiary forms, new passwords, unexplained appraisals, old signatures photocopied onto fresh pages. It changes how your own house sounds at night. It changes the temperature of a hallway when he walks into it. It changes the meaning of a closed office door. By the time I filed for divorce, Grant had already been running 3 versions of our life at once. The public one, for clients, neighbors, school fundraisers. The private one, where he slept with a junior acquisitions attorney from his firm named Celeste Warren, and paid for her apartment in Kirkland through a consulting retainer that never should have existed. And the hidden one, which mattered most, where he moved money through layered entities, borrowed against jointly held property, delayed disclosures, and counted on my exhaustion to finish what his arrogance had started. He was almost right. Almost. Divorce with a man like Grant is not the end of a marriage. It's a forensic event. Every sentence becomes evidence. Every memory becomes a timeline. Every missing page becomes motive. He hired the kind of attorney women in my position are supposed to fear. Russell Dane, silver-haired, expensive, surgically calm. Russell didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He billed by the quarter hour and weaponized procedure like a religion. His motions were always polished. His shoes were always silent. He treated judges with old-school courtesy and treated opposing parties like clerical errors. My lawyer, Elena Ortiz, was different. Smaller office, lower overhead, no marble lobby, no assistant who offered sparkling water in glass bottles. But Elena had spent 12 years untangling financial concealment cases in King County, and another 5 helping the state attorney general on fraud enforcement before she went private. She had dark curls she pinned up badly, a habit of writing notes on yellow legal pads with punishing pressure, and a look she got when someone underestimated her that made me think of locked steel drawers. Grant laughed the first time he saw her. Not loudly. Just enough. We were in the courthouse hallway on a rainy Tuesday in October. Elena was carrying 2 banker's boxes and wearing a charcoal coat with 1 button missing. Grant leaned toward Russell and smiled that small, private smile men like him think no one notices. "That's your cavalry?" he asked me. I remember the fluorescent lights, the smell of wet wool, the echo of heels down the corridor. I remember smiling back, because even then, Before the subpoenas, before the trust freeze, before the morning he lost everything, I knew something he didn't. Men like Grant mistake simplicity for weakness, and sometimes the best revenge in the world is letting them finish that thought. Back in the kitchen, his phone vibrated again. This time, he picked it up. He frowned at the screen, thumb moving fast, then faster. I watched the smile leave his face in stages, like power cutting out floor by floor in a downtown building. "What?" he said softly. Not to me. To the phone. To the first crack. He set the espresso down without drinking it and opened his banking app. His jaw tightened. He refreshed. Did it again. Then he looked toward the windows as if better internet might be waiting in the trees. "You okay?" I asked. It was the first question of the morning I had any interest in. He gave a short, dismissive laugh. Temporary hold. On what? Internal review. His voice was calm. Too calm. Grant always got calmer when the ground moved. Panic, in his world, was for people without options. He tapped again, swore under his breath. Then the phone rang. He answered without looking away from the screen. Yes. Pause. A different face now. A listening face. No, that can't be right. Another pause. Who authorized that? Longer. No. The trust isn't named in the dissolution order. We were explicit about that. The purchase funds are outside the current. He stopped, listened, looked at me, and for the first time in years, really looked. "What do you mean beneficial ownership review?" The bank had a phrase for everything. So did the court. So did regulators. That was one thing I learned in compliance years before I ever learned it in marriage. People think justice arrives as thunder. Usually it arrives as language. Precise, cold, administrative language that quietly locks a door a man thought he owned. Grant listened another 30 seconds, then cut the call and immediately dialed someone else, straight to voicemail. He dialed again, voicemail, then another number. Pick up Russell. He paced across the kitchen, bare feet silent on stone, shoulders held so rigid they looked painful. He left a message too controlled to be casual and too sharp to be calm. "Call me now." They froze the Harbor Crest transfer and flagged Evergreen Trust distributions. "I want the signed order, and I want to know who overreached." He hung up and glanced at me. I kept my expression soft, curious, almost concerned. What happened? He hated that question more than accusations. Accusations he could fight. Questions forced him to explain. "Nothing happened," he snapped, then immediately corrected tone. "A judge signed a broad temporary order. Elena pushed something aggressive after hours. Russell will vacate it." "After hours?" I asked. "It was signed this morning." "Then not after hours." He stared at me. That tiny beat mattered. It told me he was already rearranging facts inside his own head. When Grant lost control, his first instinct was narrative management, not truth. Never truth, just sequence. Who knows what, in what order, and how much time he has before reality hardens. I took a sip of cold coffee. "Is that why the title company called yesterday?" I asked. His face changed. Not much, but enough. The title company. That had been Elena's idea. 3 weeks earlier, after a disclosure hearing where Grant swore under penalty of perjury that no major asset transfers were contemplated, Elena asked me a simple question. If he were trying to convert disputed funds into a harder asset before the next hearing, she said, what would he buy? Land, I said immediately. Why? Because he thinks land feels permanent. She nodded once. And because he thinks everyone stops looking after the deed records. She was right. The Lakeview parcel was 23 acres on the water north of Chelan, not technically marital, according to Grant, because the purchase money was supposedly coming from an investment distribution tied to a trust his aunt had seeded years before. Only his aunt had not seeded it, not in the way he claimed. The trust documents Elena forced into discovery showed the original funding was modest, barely enough to justify the structure. The real capital influx came later, from a series of transfers routed through an LLC that had received proceeds from the refinance of our Bellevue home, and 2 lines of credit tied to properties not fully disclosed in the financial declaration. In plain English, he tried to wash joint money until it looked inherited. He called it strategy. The court had another word for it. The phone rang again. He answered. This time it was Russell. I could hear the older man's voice through the speaker, thin and crisp. Grant cut him off almost immediately. I don't care whose clerk processed it. I want it stayed. Pause. No, listen to me. They flagged 3 accounts and froze settlement. The seller can walk by noon. Pause. Grant's eyes moved to me again, then away. What do you mean Judge Holloway referenced omitted beneficial interests? Long pause now, long enough for me to hear my own pulse. Grant turned and walked into the pantry, maybe thinking walls could hide tone, if not words. But pantries carry sound. Shelves make echoes. Wealth does strange things to acoustics. Russell was speaking carefully, too carefully, the kind of careful that means bad news has paperwork. Elena's motion had included not only the asset tracing summary, but a declaration from a forensic accountant, a supplemental affidavit from the title company compliance officer, and this was the beautiful part. An email chain Nolan had mistakenly forwarded to the wrong address while trying to reroute closing instructions. Nolan was many things. Discreet was never one of them. Grant came back into the kitchen with the expression of a man trying not to bleed in front of a witness. He ended the call. What did Russell say? I asked. He ignored me and opened his laptop. His fingers moved so quickly over the keys, they almost stumbled. Password, bank portal, corporate dashboard, email, another email, a third screen. The first real sound of panic left him then. Not a shout, just a hard exhale through his nose. That incompetent idiot, he muttered. Nolan? I asked. His head snapped up. And there it was, the flicker, the recognition that I knew where the bodies were buried. Maybe not all of them, but enough. Stay out of this, he said. I almost laughed. Out of this. As if he hadn't spent years dragging me through it by my hair. As if the HELOC statements hadn't come to the house with forged initials on the acknowledgement pages. As if the rental income from Tacoma hadn't disappeared for 8 months, while he told the court the units were operating at a loss, as if Celeste's apartment lease hadn't been tied, through a chain of billing entries and a carelessly attached invoice, to one of the holding entities he swore had no personal expenditures. Out of this. The phrase was so absurd it steadied me. I've been in this for a while, Grant. He closed the laptop halfway. You think Elena found something? Fine. She found noise. Russell will narrow the order. Can he unsend Nolan's email? He stared. I could feel the room changing around us now. Dawn fully up, cedar branches clearer, dishwasher lights fading from blue to black. Somewhere upstairs, pipes clicked as the heating system adjusted for the morning. Ordinary sounds. Beautiful sounds. The soundtrack of a home witnessing a man discover that paper trails wake up earlier than he does. You went through my correspondence, he said finally. No, I said. Your brother sent it to a shared vendor address. The vendor forwarded it during document reconciliation. Your side produced it in the supplemental batch. That was true, though not the whole truth. Elena had to threaten sanctions to get the supplemental batch. He looked genuinely stunned for 1 second, then angry. Not because he had done anything wrong. Men like Grant rarely burn energy on moral recognition. He was angry because a mistake had occurred beneath his status. Angry because someone less competent than himself had touched the machine and left fingerprints. He stood straighter, smoothing one hand down the front of his gray t-shirt as if regaining posture could restore leverage. Even if there's a temporary freeze, he said, it changes nothing. The house remains in trust. My distributions are separate. The firm will handle any optics. The firm. That made me think of the voicemail at 6:09. Grant's firm, Alder Capital, was obsessive about reputation. Not ethics, exactly. Reputation. There's a difference. Ethics ask whether something is right. Reputation asks whether it can be explained to investors on a call without anyone sounding nervous. A partner undergoing a court-ordered beneficial ownership review attached to undisclosed transfers, commingled marital funds, and a flagged real estate acquisition. That was not a good investor call sentence. His phone lit up again. Daniel Reeves, managing partner. Grant stared at the name, then swiped to accept. Daniel. He tried for normal, failed by the second word. I watched his face as he listened. Color drained first from the mouth, then the cheeks, then the whole expensive architecture of him. His eyes narrowed, then widened. His left hand gripped the edge of the counter so hard the knuckles whitened. No, I should have been told before compliance acted. Pause. Voluntary leave? For what? Another pause. That's not an answer. Pause. No, you listen to me. He stopped because Daniel was still talking. Longer this time. Long enough for me to understand the outline even without hearing the other side. Internal review, limited access, interim separation from active deal management. Do not contact clients until further notice. Preservation of records. Every corporate phrase designed to sound temporary while quietly building a coffin. Grant's voice dropped. This is because of the petition. Pause. Allegations. Pause. There is no misappropriation. Pause. Daniel. Another long pause, then the one sentence that changed the room forever. You're suspending my authority over Harbor Crest? He went still, very still. I knew Harbor Crest. It was his biggest pending acquisition, multifamily redevelopment south of Seattle. 8 figures, months of structuring, his name on the pitch deck, his fingerprints all over the debt stack. Grant had been talking about Harbor Crest the way emperors talk about roads. Not as a project, but as proof they existed. Now even that was gone. He ended the call without goodbye. For a few seconds, the kitchen held nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the faint click of our daughter's bedroom door opening upstairs. Avery, 17 now, long-legged, sharp-eyed, too old not to know the weather inside a house, and too young to deserve any of it. Grant heard her too, and lowered his voice. This is temporary. I set down my mug. Maybe. His eyes flashed. You think this is funny? No. And I meant that. Funny wasn't the word for a collapse you had waited years to witness. Necessary. Maybe. Overdue. Accurate. But not funny. Avery came down the stairs in socks and an oversized university sweatshirt, her hair in a loose knot, phone in one hand. She looked from me to him and instantly sensed the charge in the air. Kids raised in high-conflict homes develop that radar young. Her gaze landed on Grant's clenched jaw, the laptop, the untouched espresso. "What happened?" she asked. Grant answered first. "Nothing you need to worry about." Which is the exact sentence adults use when something is absolutely worth worrying about. Avery looked at me. I kept my voice even. "There's a legal issue with some financial accounts." Her expression didn't change much, but I saw the understanding settle. She had lived through enough hearings, enough tense handoffs, enough closed-door arguments to know what that meant. Grant turned to her with that polished father voice he used in front of teachers and donors. "Go get ready for school. I'll drive you." "No, you won't," I said. The room snapped again. He looked at me like I'd struck him. "I said I'll drive her. You have calls to make. I can manage both." "No," I said, gentle as clean linen. "You can't." Avery stood frozen for one heartbeat too long, then nodded once and moved toward the mudroom, grabbing her backpack. She didn't ask again. That hurt more than if she had. Children stop asking when uncertainty becomes ordinary. Grant waited until she was gone to round on me. "Do not do that in front of her." "Do what?" "Undermine me." I stared at him. There it was again. That perfect Grant ability to stand in a burned field and complain about smoke etiquette you borrowed against this house without disclosure. I leveraged property. You moved funds through Nolan. I restructured holdings. You paid for another woman's apartment. His face hardened into stone. That is not relevant to the current order. It was such a Grant answer that I nearly admired it. Everything translated into transaction. Even infidelity had to be assessed for litigation value before it could become morally real. "Maybe not," I said, "but it's relevant to why you're standing here alone." He took a step toward me. Not violent. Grant was too controlled for obvious violence. He preferred pressure, height, proximity, the subtle intimidation of occupying more air than another person. But I didn't move. That surprised him. I had moved before, dozens of times in dozens of rooms. Not dramatically, just enough. Just a half step back to avoid escalation, a slight turn away. The invisible choreography women learn when peace is always being negotiated at the edge of a man's ego. Not this morning. "You have no idea what's actually happening," he said. I held his gaze. "Then tell me why the bank froze Evergreen Trust distributions, why Alder Row pulled your authority from Harbor Crest, why the title company blocked Lakeview, and why Russell sounds like he's billing by the panic." He went pale again. That was the moment. Not the phone calls, not the frozen wire. The moment he realized the perimeter had collapsed. That I knew enough names, enough entities, enough sequence. That I was no longer standing outside the fortress, begging to be let in. I was inside it, naming rooms. He stepped back first. I will never forget that. The front doorbell rang at 6:48 a.m. One chime, then another. Grant looked irritated, then wary. He pulled up the camera feed on his phone, and I saw something like disbelief pass over his face. "Who is it?" I asked. He did not answer. He opened the door. On the front step stood a process server in a dark rain shell, holding a flat document envelope, and a woman in a navy suit carrying a hard-sided case with the logo of a digital forensics vendor on the side. Grant's entire body went rigid. The woman spoke first. "Mr. Holloway, I'm here pursuant to the preservation order entered this morning. We need immediate access to any devices used for the management of Evergreen Trust, Hollow Oak Ventures, and Harbor Crest Communications under the listed custodial names. The process server added, "And you've been personally served." He actually laughed then, not because anything was funny, because some people laugh when they slip on ice. The body's refusal to believe what the world has already decided. "This is my home," he said. The woman glanced at the papers. The order covers devices, not sentiment. I almost admired her. Grant blocked the doorway with one hand. "My counsel hasn't reviewed this." "She can review it after preservation," the woman said, "or we can note noncompliance." He turned his head just enough to glare at me over his shoulder. "You did this." I met his eyes. "No," I said. "You did. Elena just filed it." Avery was at the foot of the stairs, motionless, having heard voices at the door. I crossed the foyer before Grant could say another word and put a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Shoes," I said quietly. "We're leaving in 5 minutes." She whispered, "Are they here for him?" "Yes." She swallowed. "Okay. No drama, no tears, just that one clipped answer kids use when reality is already too heavy to pick up with both hands." At the door, Grant was arguing procedure. He was good at procedure. It had protected him for years. Deadlines, scope, definitions. What counts as service? What counts as possession? Whether a phone used incidentally for business becomes discoverable. He kept using the voice he used in conference rooms, the one that implies systems should be embarrassed for failing in his presence. It didn't work on women paid to carry court orders before sunrise. The forensics vendor woman simply repeated, "Sir, refusal will be documented." The process server held the envelope steady. Grant finally took it. His hand was shaking now, very slightly, but shaking. He tore the seal too hard and pulled out the papers, scanning line by line, eyes racing, face tightening with every paragraph. Temporary restraining provisions, preservation directives, expanded disclosure deadlines, prohibition on transfer, encumbrance, concealment, dissipation, or conversion. The language of consequence. The language he used to think only applied to other people. He looked up, and for the first time in 13 years, truly for the first time, Grant Holloway looked uncertain of his own power. "Where's Elena getting this?" he asked me, voice low. I could have answered with a dozen things. From the tax transcripts you forgot to redact, from Nolan's forwarded email, from the apartment invoice Celeste submitted through the wrong entity, from the title company compliance officer who didn't enjoy being lied to, from the missing rent deposits, from the HELOC acknowledgement with my name spelled in a format I never use, from the bank's suspicious activity review once the wires started tripping thresholds, from your own vanity, because men like you always over-document success and underprotect deceit. Instead, I said, from the truth, mostly. He looked at the paper again, then at the woman waiting with her case. "This overreaches." "Then contest it," she said. He muttered a curse and stepped aside. I took Avery to the garage. The air out there smelled like wet concrete and cold rubber. The Tesla sat plugged in, silver and silent. Grant's Range Rover was still parked beside it, immaculate as a showroom lie. Avery buckled in and stared out the windshield. Neither of us spoke until the garage door opened and the gray morning widened ahead. When I backed down the driveway, she finally asked, "Is he going to jail?" I exhaled. "I don't know. Did he steal from you?" There are questions mothers want to answer with softness. This was not one of them. "Yes," I said. "In some ways, yes." She nodded like she already suspected as much, We drove past trimmed hedges and stone mailboxes, and houses with warm lights coming on in breakfast nooks. The kind of neighborhood designed to suggest safety through landscaping. Rain silvered the pavement. School traffic hadn't started yet. The world still had the fragile emptiness of very early morning. Avery looked down at her hands. "I used to think maybe you were exaggerating," she said. "Not because I thought you lied, just because he always sounds so sure." I gripped the wheel a little tighter. "That's how it works sometimes." She gave a small, bitter laugh that didn't belong on a 17-year-old face. "He makes everybody feel dumb." I glanced at her. She was looking straight ahead now, jaw set, eyes too dry. And suddenly, I wasn't driving my daughter to school. I was driving the future version of every woman who had ever sat at a polished kitchen island and been told that confusion was the price of loving an intelligent man. "That's ending," I said. She turned to me. "Because of court. Because of truth." She leaned back against the seat. After a moment, she said, "Good." I dropped her at school and sat in the parking lot for 2 full minutes after she went inside. Students crossed the wet walkway in hoodies and varsity jackets, laughing too loudly, carrying coffees they were too young to need. The ordinariness of it nearly undid me. There is something brutal about normal mornings, continuing while your own life is finally telling the truth. My phone buzzed. "Elena." I answered immediately. "Well," she said, not bothering with hello. "How does he look?" I let out a breath that was almost a laugh, like a man who just learned paper bites back. "That'll happen." In the background, I could hear traffic and the rustle of files. "Russell?" I asked. "Already filed an objection to scope. Judge isn't hearing it before tomorrow afternoon. Too bad for him." "What about Alder Row?" We sent courtesy notice to their general counsel at 5:58. They moved faster than I expected. Daniel called him. "Good," Elena said. "Pressure works best when it has multiple addresses." That was Elena's gift. She understood that consequences should never arrive alone. One frozen account can be appealed. One delayed closing can be blamed on a clerk. One accusation can be spun as bitterness. But a bank freeze, a title stop, a preservation order, a firm compliance review, and a supplemental disclosure deadline all landing before 7 a.m. That becomes weather. "He still thinks this is temporary," I said. "Everything is temporary," Elena replied, "including arrogance." I smiled despite myself. "What happens next?" "He'll try to move fast, faster than is smart. Watch for calls to Nolan, calls to Celeste, maybe an attempt to manufacture documents or explain timing retroactively. We're ready for that. Also, there's one more thing." My stomach tightened. "What?" "The accountant finished tracing the Mercer Island refinance proceeds last night. The money didn't just touch Hollow Oak. It cycled through a charitable donor-advised account before coming back into Evergreen." I closed my eyes. Even now, Grant had found a fresh layer. "Can he explain it?" "Not legally," Elena said, "not cleanly, and not without creating new problems. Which is why Russell sounded tired." I looked across the rainy parking lot at the school entrance. Kids vanishing through glass doors into first period, into exams and gossip and morning announcements. "How bad is it?" I asked. Elena paused. Then with the calm of someone who respects facts more than drama, she said, "For him, catastrophic, if we keep him from outrunning his own paperwork." When I got back to the house at 7:39, the forensics vendor van was still outside. Grant's Range Rover was gone. Inside, the foyer smelled faintly of rain and printer toner. The woman in the navy suit was speaking with a technician near the study. Both nodded politely as I passed. On the kitchen counter sat Grant's espresso cup, still full, a skin forming over the surface. His laptop was gone too. So were 2 desk drawers from the office, now emptied onto the floor in sorted piles. Statements, property tax records, investor mailers, notebooks, receipts, a passport copy, a yellow envelope labeled Lakeview Closing, another labeled EWG Trust. He had always loved abbreviations, as if shrinking words could shrink guilt. I walked through the house slowly. The living room with its white sectional and untouched art books. The dining room where he hosted clients and corrected my stories in front of them. The den where I found Hollow Oak Ventures for the first time. The upstairs hallway where Avery used to sit outside her bedroom door when we fought, pretending to read. This house had seen 1,000 invisible injuries, none of them loud enough to call the police, all of them loud enough to change the shape of a person. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number, I answered. A woman's voice, tight, controlled, familiar in a way I hated instantly. Mara? Celeste. Of course. Yes. Long pause. I think Grant is trying to blame me for some expenses, she said. I leaned against the kitchen island and stared at the untouched espresso. Is he? He said if anyone asks, the apartment was temporary corporate housing. I said nothing. Mara. I didn't know about the rest of this. That might even have been true. Mistresses are often told selective lies too. Not because men respect them less than wives, but because men like Grant respect nobody enough for full honesty. What do you want from me? I asked. Another pause. Then the smallest fracture in her voice. He told me you were unstable, that the divorce was mostly about your drinking and paranoia. I almost smiled. Old playbook. Reliable. Efficient. Woman objects to financial secrecy, so woman becomes emotional liability in the story. And now? I asked. He called me at 7:05 and asked me to delete invoices. There it was. The instinct Elena predicted. Move fast. Too fast. What did you say? I hung up. Good. For 1 second, in the quiet ruined kitchen of the man who had lied to both of us in different fonts, I felt something almost like pity for her. Not absolution, not alliance, just the bleak recognition of overlapping damage. You should get your own lawyer, I said. I know. She hesitated, then very softly, I'm sorry. Maybe she meant the affair. Maybe the lies. Maybe only the inconvenience of discovering she had chosen badly. It didn't matter. Be sorry somewhere useful, I said, and ended the call. At 8:11, Grant texted, Do not speak to third parties about pending litigation. Still issuing directives. Incredible. At 8:14, another message came. You are making this worse than it needs to be. That one made me laugh out loud in an empty kitchen. At 8:21, another. Russell requests no contact with firm personnel. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I opened Elena's latest email and read the draft chronology she wanted me to review for tomorrow's hearing. It was 27 pages long and clinically devastating. Dates, account numbers, property records, email excerpts, loan applications, discrepancies between sworn declarations and banking activity. It turned 13 years of gaslighting into numbered exhibits. There are few experiences more clarifying than seeing your private suffering translated into admissible fact. Around 9 o'clock, the title company left me a voicemail confirming Lakeview Closing was suspended indefinitely pending court guidance. At 9:17, Elena forwarded a notice showing Alder Rowe had initiated a partnership review under its conduct provisions. At 9:42, Nolan, apparently deciding blood was thicker than self-preservation, emailed Elena's office through his own counsel asking for a practical resolution before everyone's reputations are damaged. Everyone's reputations. Not everyone's life. Not everyone's marriage. Not everyone's daughter's peace. Just reputations. I forwarded it back with no comment. At 10:06, Russell finally called me directly. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mara," he said, voice polished as always. "I hope we can take some temperature out of this." No. A pause. "I understand emotions are elevated. Then you understand wrong." Another pause. Longer. Russell had spent months treating me like an unpredictable spouse, best managed through procedural containment. It was interesting hearing him search for a new tone in real time. "The court may have been presented with an overbroad interpretation of mixed funds," he said. "The court can read bank records. We believe certain transfers have innocent explanations." Then explain them. Silence. Then the careful pivot. "Grant is willing to discuss a structured settlement." There it was. Men resist disclosure until disclosure begins talking back. Then suddenly, they become believers in peaceful resolution. I walked to the window and looked out at the wet driveway where the Range Rover had once made him feel invincible. "Not today," I said. "Mara, scorched earth litigation helps no one. It helps the truth catch up. You're risking long-term value." I thought about Avery sitting in algebra while grown adults in expensive suits tried to measure the market impact of her father's deceit. "Long-term value," I repeated. That's a beautiful phrase for stolen time. Then I ended the call. The hearing the next afternoon was standing room only by family court standards, not because we were famous, because financial deception cases attract a particular kind of professional curiosity. Lawyers talk, clerks talk, compliance teams whisper. When a polished private equity partner arrives to argue that a trust freeze should be narrowed while opposing counsel walks in with a supplemental binder thick enough to stun a horse, people find reasons to be nearby. Grant wore a charcoal suit and a tie the color of old blood. Russell looked immaculate. Elena looked undercaffeinated and dangerous. I wore cream silk under a black blazer and the pearl earrings my mother left me, because there is no reason a woman should look broken when the man who tried to break her is finally being itemized. Grant did not look at me until the judge entered. When he did, it was brief, and what I saw in his face was not hatred. Not exactly. It was disbelief that I had remained standing long enough to become expensive. Judge Holloway was patient in the way only truly irritated judges can be. She let Russell speak. She let him argue scope, timing, burden, reputational harm, intrusion into separate property, and the dangerous precedent of allowing dissolution proceedings to metastasize into quasi-fraud investigations. Then she asked one question. "Counsel, if the property is separate, why did funds trace through jointly encumbered assets and undeclared entities before reaching the trust?" Russell answered for 4 minutes and never touched the question. Elena rose after him with no theatrics and no wasted language. She walked the court through each transfer like laying stones across water. Refinance proceeds, Hollow Oak, Evergreen, donor-advised routing, Lakeview closing, Nolan's email, Celeste's apartment expenses, omissions in sworn disclosures, firm compliance response, preservation necessity. When she finished, the courtroom was so quiet I could hear someone turning a page 3 rows back. Judge Holloway adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Grant. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "your declarations to this court appear, at minimum, materially incomplete. At minimum. A devastating phrase, because judges save their mildest words for the moments they want to be quoted later. Russell requested time to supplement. Granted in part, but the freeze remained. The preservation order remained. Expanded production deadlines remained. And the court added a special master review of contested asset tracing at Grant's expense. At Grant's expense. The phrase landed on him like visible weight. He closed his eyes once, just once, then nodded as if being charged for the autopsy of his own deceit was some ordinary business inconvenience. By the time we left the courthouse, his image had already begun to fray in professional circles. Alder Rowe announced his leave by Friday. Harbor Crest reassigned lead management. 2 investors requested clarification from the firm's governance committee. Celeste obtained counsel and produced messages. Nolan, faced with the possibility of being personally exposed, turned cooperative in the cowardly way weak men often do when loyalty starts costing money. And the house? The house stayed where it had always truly belonged. In contention, yes, but no longer under his private mythology. No longer a fortress wrapped in paper tricks. No longer the silent witness to a story only he was allowed to tell. 3 months later, the settlement conference began at 9 a.m. and ended before lunch. Not because Grant became honorable, because numbers had trapped him more efficiently than emotion ever could. The final agreement reallocated the Bellevue home, 2 rental properties, liquidated a brokerage account previously masked as trust-derived, imposed reimbursement for undisclosed dissipation, and referred several tax matters for independent review no one on his side seemed eager to discuss aloud. Avery's education fund was restored in full. My legal fees were substantially covered. The Lakeview parcel never closed. Harbor Crest never returned to him. Alder Rowe accepted his resignation before year-end. He lost the title he loved. He lost the deal he bragged about. He lost the structure he used to hide behind. He lost the ability to narrate himself as the only adult in the room. And on the morning the settlement was signed, he texted me one sentence. "You didn't have to destroy everything." I looked at the words for a long time. Then I thought about the kitchen at 6:12 a.m., the vibrating phone, the espresso cooling untouched, the first thin crack in a life he had built from polished omissions. I thought about Avery learning too young that certainty can be a weapon. I thought about Elena's yellow legal pads, Russell's careful voice, Nolan's sloppy emails, Celeste's frightened apology, the judge's measured irritation, the forensics case at my door before sunrise. I thought about every year I spent doubting my own mind because a man with expensive shoes kept calling deceit complexity. And finally, I wrote back the only answer that was true. I didn't destroy everything, Grant. I just stopped helping you hold it up.